So my name is Sara Brumfield with FromThePage.
And I'm Ben.
And we wanted to tell you what we've learned over a decade or so of running crowdsourcing projects. Before we get started, I wanted to point out we have a couple of other webinars coming up in the next month and a half. And you're welcome to join us for those. The first one is about creating alt text for images using conscious editing guidelines, which is an archival process out of the University of North Carolina. And we actually, our speaker for that is one of the staff members there. And then the other one.
The other one is Joe Wysentowski, who is at the Office of the Historian of the U.S. State Department, who's presenting on the ways that he has been using AI to attempt automatic transcription of some particularly challenging types of records.
So we'd love to see you at either of those, or both. Okay, so what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about what is FromThePage, our platform, what's effective crowdsourcing, and that kind of consists of thinking about volunteers, selecting materials, instructions, and kicking off your project, and then keeping your volunteers engaged. And we'll have some discussion and Q&A, and then we'll kind of do a show and tell of FromThePage and how kind of all these pieces come together in our platform. We'll send out a recording and links to all the resources that we mentioned in today's webinar, so you don't have to scramble to get things written down.
All right, so let's get started. So Sarah and I run a platform for crowdsourcing manuscript transcription, OCR correction, metadata creation, and other kind of image-based metadata enhancement tasks that the platform's called FromThePage. So there are a number of different kinds of crowdsourcing tasks out there. We focus on material that is based on archival material, special collections, and specifically textual records that we're seeing a lot of other interesting examples come up as times go on. That said, the things we're going to be talking about today are kind of general skills that we think apply to a lot of other crowdsourcing tasks as well. So our own platform lets people see an image of a page and gives them a place to type to transcribe the text from that page. We try to keep things as simple as possible for users. We try to keep at least the software as simple as possible for users because transcribing text is difficult enough. We have hosted a lot of successful projects over the years. Here's a handful of some of our earlier partners, and a lot of what we'll be talking about comes from examples from them or that we've learned from working with them. So what is effective crowdsourcing? We think that effective crowdsourcing is really a collaboration between a memory institution and the public. And there's kind of twofold goals, but the main goal is deep engagement, deep public engagement with special collections and archives. So when I say deep engagement, let's talk about that. So most organizations, I feel like, have social media presences, Instagram accounts, things that let them expose their material more broadly to the public. And that is wonderful. That is a very broad engagement. But one of the challenges is that oftentimes the only way that people can engage is via a like button or a repost or something similar, right? It's a good way to kind of spread the word in a shallow way, but it's not a great way to engage with the passion and expertise and knowledge that members of the public have about material that your institution may be posting. It's not really immersive, right? And so it's not this kind of two-way collaboration. So in addition to being about deep public engagement, crowdsourcing is also about improving metadata for digitized assets in ways that require massive amounts of human interpretation. Now, that does not necessarily mean massive numbers of humans or massive numbers of items. It could just be one person who's really passionate, who's willing to spend a lot of time transcribing a single set of letters or a single diary. But that's the kind of thing that archival and library staff usually aren't able to commit their resources to. Organizations have very different priorities, so they're usually not able to have staff members go and do these deep deep projects when there's boxes and boxes of unprocessed material to
So this example on the botanic library, and you actually don't involve much text, but the text a lot of interpretation because it is botanical. There are a lot of things and a lot of things in Latin. So you kind of have to know orchids and enough German and enough Latin to be able to interpret what's on the page.
So speaking of archival and library staff, effective crowdsourcing is only possible with the guidance and engagement of staff members, right? You cannot replace staff members, informational professionals with the crowd, right? That doesn't work. You cannot, you're not going to get the crowd to come do your job for you.
Yeah. Right? So we have a cute picture of a puppy here because our standing joke is that crowdsourcing is not free as in speech or free as in beer, but free as in puppy. The puppy's free, but you have to take care of it. You have to do a lot of work. Volunteers that are participating in these projects don't like to be ignored. They don't like having their work lost. They're doing something that is meaningful and they're engaging with you and your institution. Therefore, you need to make sure that the work is actually meaningful and you need to engage with them. So we're going to talk about the work that goes into these projects to make them successful. So let's start with volunteers, because if you don't have volunteers, you aren't going to have a successful crowdsourcing project, right? I used to only have one slide on this, and now I have 4 because volunteers are so important to crowdsourcing projects. So this is a snapshot of a week on From the Page. This is right after we hit our 2 millionth page transcribed. And over that week, we had 450 volunteers working on the platform. And when we look across a year, we have about 5,000 volunteers. So I think that's really interesting, and just how many people are engaged and working and how they're kind of spread across many different projects. So we want that magic to happen for you to post your material on From the Page and for one of these volunteers to find it and start working on it. We work very hard to give volunteers ways to find interesting, active, well-managed projects. It isn't always easy, right? When you run a project on From the Page, we also send out a monthly newsletter that features all the new projects, but you also should probably work to recruit volunteers because your most dedicated volunteers are the ones that already know your institution, that have ties to your location, to your material. That level of engagement already means that you're just going to have that much better of volunteers. So this is actually a picture of some of the Library of Virginia's volunteers at their annual Transcribiversary. They've been doing this for over 8 years, and they host basically a birthday party for their transcription efforts every September. What I love about this is how diverse this group is. So we know that volunteers tend to skew older. Retirees love working on these projects, but Library of Virginia has a lot of students that work with them as well. So start by thinking, where can we find volunteers? Who will they be? Do you already have volunteers who work with your institution? Do you have people who are local, who are interested? Maybe you have a local genealogy society or local history societies that would be interested in working with you. Maybe you're deep on a particular subject matter and you can reach out to communities around that subject matter. For instance, we did a very early project with the Yaquina Head lighthouses. They had lighthouse keepers logs over decades, and they were able to engage with lighthouse fans. It turns out there are people who are really enthusiastic about lighthouses, and they had those people come in and work virtually on transcribing. When you think about volunteers, you can also think about what material has been the most popular with your patrons and think about why it's popular. This image is a volunteer with the Missouri State Archives. The volunteer is holding her grandfather's birth certificate. So genealogists love projects with lots of names and vital information, even if the material is not as engaging as diaries or letters. We've seen some very successful projects with heritage organizations like the DAR. The other thing to realize, the last thing to realize, is that crowdsourcing is something that you may not be familiar with, and it may not be something that your volunteers are familiar with. It's a bit intimidating, right? So if you think through how you can make it easier for them, that puts you in a good mindset for working with your volunteers. And what we see is that volunteers and transcribers get really into this type of work. It's very fun, it's engaging. The image on the screen represents the most active transcribers on 3 different projects. By active, they did at least 10 pages. The Indiana at projects at the Indiana Archives, the Library of Virginia, and the California State Library. And what you see here is that while the bulk of their active transcribers were independent, there were overlaps. There are volunteers who go from project to project. We have one volunteer who about once a month will scroll through our list of projects looking for something she hasn't worked on. And when she finds something that looks interesting, she'll hop in and try it. Sometimes she finds something she really wants to work on and goes deep and contributes a lot. Sometimes she does a page or 2 and moves on.
So how do you figure out what material is appropriate for a crowdsourcing project? Volunteers are motivated by a number of things. Not every volunteer is motivated by the same thing. We recommend that you choose material that can tell a good story, provide an immersive experience, or is important, right, contains local history or genealogy information. One thing to look for is material that can tell good stories. If you get started reading a diary, you want to turn the page and find out what happens next. Letters and diaries provide this kind of intrinsic motivation through the narrative. Volunteers want to know what happens next. This is an example from a project that I worked on, that I ran with a set of family diaries. And at the bottom, you can see the image and the transcription. At the top, what you can see is an email that I received from a volunteer who is just fascinated by the people in this and wants to know what is going wrong with Josie, right? One of the people who's mentioned in the diarist household, a doctor keeps coming to see her, and the volunteer just really wants to know. She's worried about this person who has been dead for 100 years. Right? So letters and diaries provide an immersive experience through the narrative, but non-narrative material can do the same thing. So when the Alabama State Archives indexed their World War I service card collection, the collections were organized by county. So as a result, the volunteers who would volunteer on, say, Coffee County surnames starting with B, right? They would end up getting a snapshot of their community in 1918 as they indexed each service member's name, how old they were, where they were listed, what branch they were in, where they served, things like that. You can also be successful with material that has a lot of local history. So the Indianapolis Public Library ran a project transcribing records from Indianapolis public schools. These records are pretty dry, in my opinion. Lists of student names, lists of parents, and some of the other documents in this. But they're a genealogist's goldmine, and volunteers understand that.
We also find that if you can give your if you give your volunteers a sense of accomplishment, that's very motivating. I think we're all motivated by checking things off a list. So some of the reason the World War I service card projects were very successful is that you had a single card, and Alabama at least only collected about 5 fields from that card. So a transcriber could get a lot done. We really like to get stuff done. That feeling of accomplishment kept volunteers coming back. That particular project was 111,000 World War I service cards, and they transcribed them all in 2.5 months. Because their material hit so many of these points, and because I had such great relationships with our local genealogy and history organizations, they were able to accomplish that.
So once you've identified the material to host a project on, the next step is to define the task and come up with instructions. So for transcription projects, that means giving people instructions on how to transcribe. The minute anyone encounters a word that's unclear, or they hit an abbreviation or a non-standard spelling, they're going to have questions. So we encourage projects to develop transcription conventions that give instructions to volunteers about what to do when they encounter these things. And we actually show this on the transcription screen itself. So it's right underneath the field volunteers are typing into, so they can just scroll down and find it if they're running into problems. This is a really nice example from the Wisconsin Historical Society on some of the projects that they run. One of the things that we recommend as you're developing instructions is that you transcribe a couple of example pages. You can upload these as a separate section and link to them, because people will we'll find out, well, how do they do this, right? Not everyone wants to read the manual, but they will look at examples. And this might be a way for people to figure out what you did if their questions aren't answered by your transcription conventions. As you work through projects, you can iterate, you can improve conventions and your help text as people ask questions, or you learn more, or you suddenly discover that they're doing things you don't like, or there's types of documents that you had no idea were in the collection. You can add pieces as you go along. That's pretty easy to change. We think that as you're creating examples and developing conventions, if you can do that with a handful of staff members, go out into the hall and grab somebody or ask someone to jump on a Zoom call or something and ask them to transcribe a page, then listen to the questions that they ask. That gives you an opportunity to update your conventions and have them reflect the real world problems that someone unfamiliar with the material is going to run into. So in terms of kicking off a project, we mentioned bringing people together to transcribe a few documents to develop your conventions, but this can also be a great way to get a project started. In-person transcribe-a-thons are a great way to do outreach. The Library of Virginia does a transcribe-a-thon every month, but
Have to do that.
yes.
That's a lot. They have a big staff.
You can, well, once you've got your conventions and things in place, you can launch a transcribe-a-thon at the beginning of the project and bring in people who you think may be leaders within their field or in their communities, people who are active in genealogy organizations or historical societies, to do an in-person transcribe-a-thon. So what that does is it lets you give some hands-on instructions to get people over the hump and the discomfort of, what am I doing here? Is my work good enough? Right? They get used to the technology you're using, they get used to the documents you're working with, and they get used to the task. And then they can take that knowledge and confidence back to their own communities and encourage other people to join in. Transcribe-a-thons are also a great event that local media likes to highlight. The New Orleans Jazz Museum did a transcribe-a-thon working with colonial French. And you can see here on the left a Facebook post by the French department at Tulane saying, hey, anybody interested in French should go do this. Well, this is kind of a viral moment. It's not the New Orleans Jazz Museum promoting this. It's the French department at a totally different institution. Participants also may post about this. We see a tweet by someone who's in a transcribe-a-thon saying, check it out, this is so cool, I'm learning how to transcribe Latin. Neat stuff.
So you don't have to run a transcribe-a-thon when you kick off a project. It's just one way to reach people. But you do need to do some outreach and some marketing. If you have existing outreach venues, mailing lists, social media accounts, you should definitely use those and mention or push your project. We've actually read some research recently that mailing lists, your newsletters, like emails that you send out to people that have a relationship with your institution, are actually much better at recruiting volunteers than social media.
Or in that case, radio ads, right? They had a major campaign. Yes.
Interesting. Yeah. If you have a physical location, you can do handouts, things at a checkout desk or as you walk out the door that you can grab. You can also look for subject matter enthusiast communities, people who would be interested in the material and might not be local. Often we find that expats, people who have a connection to your location but have left, have some of the strongest ties. On Facebook, or you might find Twitter or X accounts. There may be magazines. We have a whole post that we'll provide in the follow-up email about how to find organizations that might be interested in a particular subject. We've also seen local news channels, both print and television, pick up these projects because they're interesting, they're visual. You have cool old documents, you have people they can come in and take pictures of, and they're feel-good stories, right? They're a way for the local community to contribute to your mission of preserving memories. So this is actually coverage by a local TV station of a project from the Seattle Municipal Archives. And this is Jeannie Fisher, who's the archivist there, and there's actually all of the municipal records in the background, and this makes really great TV. We also saw that when the North Carolina State Archives launched their Colonial Court Records project, they had coverage in 2 large newspapers. So it happened to be around the holidays, slow news days, and it brought in a lot of interested volunteers. Those days are actually the highest number of visits to From the Page's website that year. Once you kick off a project and you're starting to get volunteers working on it, you need to figure out how to keep them engaged. It's not unusual for volunteers to drop by, transcribe a page, and you may never see them again. So we have a couple of suggestions for keeping those volunteers engaged. The more you can keep, the more you'll accomplish. So the first thing is to welcome new users. So we send out a note every night to each project owner telling them what's gone on in their collections that previous day. You'll get something like the screenshot at the bottom where it shows you the name of someone who's joined your particular project. You can go to the collaborator tab and see people who've joined, and you can grab their email addresses if they've opted in and send them an email. It could be a stock email telling them what the project is, the purpose of it. Volunteers really like purpose. What the transcribed material is going to be used for. If you have any training materials or examples, you can include links to that, and include how to contact you. Obviously, the email you sent probably, but you want them to be able to ask you questions or share something cool that they found, or ask if they can bring in a group of 20 people to help you transcribe, and all of those things you want them to be able to find you. So make it easy. In addition to welcoming new users, that nightly email will also include comments and questions from your collaborators, from the volunteers who are transcribing for you.
So volunteers can and will ask questions as they work. Answers by staff or other volunteers will appear on the pages and from the page, right, that people are transcribing. We try to have these conversations about the material take place in the context of the material, so that you don't get an email saying, help, I can't read the word on the 5th line, and not know what document people are talking about. So if you look on the left-hand side here of the screen, you'll see one of these comment threads. You have a volunteer named Olivia who is working on the lighthouse project. She says, hey, I'm having trouble reading this. There's all this activity around a hack. They clean the hack, they paint the hack, they varnish the hack. What is a hack? And the very next day, the people running this, the Friends of Yakina Lighthouses, respond and they say, we have no idea, right? And this is actually a really good thing, because their response automatically sends an email to Olivia, and also it shows up on the activity stream, and she's going to see that there's somebody at the other end of the line. She asked a question, she got a response. Admittedly, the response was, we don't know what this is, but we'll keep thinking about it. And then the very next day, they post again with an update saying, we looked up hack boat and discovered that it's sort of a general purpose maintenance boat, something that you would totally need if you were running a lighthouse. So as I think we mentioned before, those nightly activity emails that go to the project owners include these kinds of comments. And you can see on the right-hand side an example of these, where a project that I ran, we have a set of notes by someone who's commenting, and you can see that not every comment is going to be a question, right? There may be interesting observations, or, in this case, there's this weird term that the transcriber ran across, and she's looked up what this is and described what it might be. That's really cool.
So the other thing that we recommend that you include is your contact information. So we have a footer that shows up on every page of your project. This is from the LA County Library. They link to their Facebook, their Twitter, their Instagram, and that questions contact us is a mail to form where you can mail them if you have questions. The last thing we recommend is that you send a newsletter. It doesn't have to be complicated or even big. It's just do something as often as you can. We recommend maybe once a month, but if you only get it out once a quarter, that's okay too. It kind of depends on how fast your project is moving and whether it kind of needs kind of a jolt to kind of remind people that it exists. You can pull a list of all of your collaborator emails from the project owner view and from the page, and you can put them into your email client, or if you use something fancy like MailChimp or Constant Contact, you can put them there. And we have blog posts that have lots of examples of what different people do for crowdsourcing project newsletters. So that's most of what we have, but we kind of like to finish this up with some of the kind of inspiration behind From the Page. We really believe that we as, all of you as institutions benefit from the work done by volunteers, but the entire historical community benefits from an increased public awareness of an appreciation for what we do. So crowdsourcing really invites citizens to join in that work, gives them a sense of responsibility for the past that we all share, and a direct, personal connection to the people who made it, and a desire to support and protect the institutions that preserve it. So just get started, right? If you want to experiment with this, I would encourage you to act on it. We offer quick start calls where you can bring 200 pages, PDF, images, and we'll work with you to get your project configured and launched. No strings attached, really. That project can run for as long as it needs to. We want folks to see the magic of crowdsourcing so we can start imagining how to make it part of your archives work. So that link plus the resources from today's webinar and a recording will be included in the email that we send out in the next couple of days.
So that's everything that we have. Sorry, I hit the link, right? That's everything that we have prepared. So we wanted to turn the conversation over to discussion, and if there's any comments or questions that anyone have, it's a small enough group that feel free to unmute yourself and ask, or you can type anything into the chat. And then if there's time after the general discussion, we can do a demo on the page. You will have to unmute yourself. Will the slides be available after the meeting?
The recording will be. We don't really share the slides, although we can. If you want to send me a note, I'll send you a link to that or respond to the email that we send out.
Yeah, we can. Other questions, comments, objections? Is there software you need to transcribe? So FromThePage is entirely web-based. So, you go to it with your web browser, the image is in the web browser, the place to type is in the web browser, so you don't have to install any software.
Yeah, no desktop, anything.
Other questions? Are there particular adjustments you need to make for your projects based on the size of institution? That's an interesting question. I don't think we've gotten that before.
So I would say it's not much the size of your institution, but the size of your project, how fast you want it completed. So you can put material up and you can just leave it up and not nurture the project, right? Just what this whole webinar has been about.
Don't follow any of the recommendations from this webinar. Just put it up there and see if magic happens.
Right, and sometimes it does. The more interesting material, it definitely does. The less interesting material, not so much. Vital records are important, but people don't always jump in and work on them.
Yeah, financial records are very important often, but
those are really hard to get transcribed. But diaries, letters, those all generally end up done. If you want them done expediently, then the more you manage and engage with your community, then the faster that will happen. And the bigger the project is, again, the longer it will take / the more kind of work you should do to try to engage.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if we completely answered your question, Kat, so feel free to ask any follow-ups.
Right.
Question by Deborah Anderson: where does the transcribed data live, locally or in the cloud?
In the cloud. We run our own servers. They're private servers, and we have very formal IT survey sort of deals where we describe how we encrypt the data and things like that, which we are happy to send you. They're kind of boring.
That's from the page, and most crowdsourcing platforms, they are collaboration platforms, right? They're not a place for your material to be preserved forever. It's a working environment, and the idea is that you upload images and basic metadata, and people transcribe, they index, they translate. You run these projects, and then at the end you get something out. So we have about 24 different export formats that we support, and they range from anything as researcher friendly as a PDF or a Microsoft Word file, all the way over to complicated library system formats for full text search indexing or plain text, all the way over to even more technical formats for digital humanities and documentary editing, so TEI, XML, and things like that. So the idea is that while we don't ever make anyone take material down, and in fact, we like it remaining up, the idea is that you would also pull all the material out that you're done with the transcriptions for in whatever format is most useful for you, possibly multiple formats.
All of them, if you want.
Right.
So the next question is, I know your focus is more on paper documents, but could preliminary oral history transcripts be uploaded for revision? If so, what format would you suggest? So the short answer is yes. The long answer is schedule a call and let us figure it out together, because we haven't really set up any of those projects. But really, if you have text that needs editing or revising from the page, is a good platform for that. What we'd end up doing is kind of finding some placeholder images to match it to, which is kind of odd.
Well, what we might do, depending on what the PDF files is you know, you upload the transcripts, the PDF transcripts, and then we would pull the text out of them and they'd be ready to be corrected.
Yes.
Having that connected to an audio file and synchronizing it, that's kind of up to you. So that's kind of complicated.
Let's see, Kat says, I really appreciate the ideas presented here on how to further advertise these types of projects. It's something I've been wanting to pursue more at my institution. It can feel overwhelming to get started. That's part of why we offer the 200-page trial, is just pick some documents, get them uploaded, really, and we experiment just so you know how it works and get comfortable with it. And then we will feature that project in a newsletter. And, you know, and this is, you know, if you don't have a lot of time to do the advertisement and the recruitment, you know, we're happy to show it to our volunteers that are already, you know, passionate about doing this type of work. And let's see where it goes from there.
Right. And one of the things that you can do with those trials is work on, you know, getting the, you know, once things are transcribed, you can get the material out and you can see, well, here's how we can use this in our own systems, or here are the things we need to change. And you can kind of see how that round trip experience might work for your institution and say, oh, hey, check it out. Now we can search these things we couldn't before, and then maybe be able to make a case for doing these broader projects.
More questions?
You see
I did see that last comment by Nix, but I think the answer is let's have a call. Let's talk about it. So.
Yeah. Is there a possibility for free access for the need to create a data set for their subjects?
200 pages.
200 pages, that's right. Yep.
$100 a month beyond that. So we try to keep it in line with, you know, the cost of going to a conference or something, right? Depending on how long it takes you to get your project done.
Yeah, and I will say that, you know, for people who are very cost conscious, you know, once a project is completed, you can switch the project over to read only, and then, you know, you don't have to pay. You're not charged for that project.
Right. You can still export. You can't edit.
Yeah. Yeah, you can get the data out. Right. All right. Should we perhaps drop into a demo? All right, so this is going to be a very, very informal demo. You know, I just opened up a handful of things in different tabs, and you know, we'll be kind of taking you through kind of the basics. But if you have questions, feel free to interrupt us, unmute yourself and holler, because we might not be able to see things in the chat. But again, just interrupt us with any questions. We interrupt each other all the time. Yes. It's fine. It's fine. So let me share my screen again. Okay, so we are going to take a look at a project run at the Library of Virginia, which is a set of resolutions related to revolution and the American Revolution.
Okay. There is a question. Speaking of editing, are you saying that after a project is completed and pulled from the page, the institution couldn't edit if a mistake was found? So that's an interesting question. There are multiple answers to it, and it goes like this. If you transcribe in from the page and then you cancel your subscription and we leave your material on from the page but make it read only, no, you can't. We assume you have a downstream system where you have put the text that you can then edit that text, right? That's Kind of that's one answer to that. The other answer is we have a lot of institutions that just kind of run projects regularly. They don't ever turn on and off from the page. It's we are part of kind of their infrastructure for how they create metadata for collections. And in that case, as long as you leave the collection up, and it could be private if you don't want it to be visible, you can turn off the read-only, fix it, re-export it, and kind of go downstream again.
So back to the demo. I apologize. I just realized that I actually have a different thing open because there were so many. The Virginia resolutions have proven to be very popular. So instead, we're going to take a look at a totally different institution at Illinois State University. And these are the Elmer Kelvin's papers, and these are from World War I. So we are going to try to transcribe some of this. So the first thing I want to know is what do we do about, Paris, these kinds of things. And I'm going to scroll down and see transcription conventions. Do they say anything about the date? And I don't really see anything here about what to do about the date. So I'm just going to do my best. So we're going to type Paris, May 31st. And that's that.
Saturday AM.
1919. Here, Warren. This note must be brief. We soon start for hours drive in Paris. Then after luncheon, we head for phone. Okay, so I'm going to save this kind of as a draft. I'm not going to mark it as complete because we're not done transcribing this, and I don't want to spend your time waiting for all this to be transcribed. And it looks like I actually made some errors here, some typos. This note must be brief. Wow, I did a terrible job. Yes, yeah. Is there something wrong with your T key on this keyboard? I don't know. After luncheon, we head for bone. All right, so let's see. Okay, so one of the things that we try to do is provide attribution for every edit made. So as people are typing, every time they hit save, we track that. You can see here on the version tab that there are 3 versions of this page. The first one uploaded by the Milner library, and the second one by Sara with typing, and the third one, which is for the one that we're looking at now. And if you look over on the right-hand side, you can see that there's a visualization of the changes that were made. So if we had deleted any characters, they would appear in red. In this case, we added what looks like nothing but the letter T to 3 things. And those are highlighted in green. So as people are working, we can kind of track that. One of the other things that we like to track and want to show off is that we mentioned that there are these questions. Well, we ran into a question when we first started doing this. Was what do we do about the date? So
I'm also curious about the form data.
okay, so
Let's say data, not dates.
Okay, so you want to read that out loud?
Are there particular conventions for transcribing dates or other form data written into the pre-printed fields on YMCA stationery?
So I'm going to save that note. And so tomorrow morning, the people just will see this as a question. Though they can also look now. If we look at the homepage for this particular project, you look on the right-hand side, you see the list of recent notes and and then we can see some other interesting examples.
3 days ago, someone had almost the same question.
All right, so let's see what somebody said and follow that conversation. Oh, this is all in German. Or no, the top bits are in German. Okay, so somebody says, in the case of letters, do you also need the headers transcribed? Thank you. And the Milner Library says, yes, transcribing the header text is helpful. So that's right. I've got answers there.
So
So we can use the platform not just for these narrative documents like these, but also for documents that are a little drier for things like data sets. So let's take a look at one of the, this is a project by the Missouri Science. And if I can get zoom away, take a look at it. So let's transcribe this page. Sorry, my Zoom controls are kind of weird. Okay. Okay, so as you can see, this is a tabular prison register. And all of government record of this kind of format where you've got material that is, it's not something like the letters we were transcribing from 1919, where you kind of like to read that in bed, right? It's kind of cool to see somebody going to Paris or whatever at the end of World War I. This is really kind of creating a data set or an index into the records. And so what the Missouri State Archives have done is configured this project to use what we call field-based transcription. So you can see that they have created these fields with data types for the material that they are interested in, which is primarily information about the inmate and their family that's recorded, because they're primarily trying to serve genealogists. Because these have two different pages, one on the left side and one on the right, they've differentiated these. Okay, page 1, we want you to do this. Page 2, we want you to do this other thing. And so, as you can see, this is a different kind of transcription, but the process is very similar. One of the big differences is that when the Missouri State Archives goes to export this document, in addition to pulling out full text or HTML or Word documents, which are not that useful for this, they can also export a spreadsheet that is going to put a record per page with a column for each one of these fields that they've got configured. What are some other examples of tasks or things that we could show off? Yeah, I don't actually have a spreadsheet open, so let me go to open one here in a minute. Should we do the Swedish National Archives project? That's a pretty fun one.
And that does have spreadsheets, right?
Yes, yeah. So
I think that one may show up under
record.
I'm just gonna look at the
history. Oh yeah, let's take a look under women's history. That should definitely if there's any. So in 1922, there's a petition to the government of Sweden to give women the right to vote. And did I not successfully click on this? We are on Sarah's laptop instead of our usual machine. And so there were that went out all over the country that asked women to write down their name, their occupation, their
separated by county.
Right, and these were one page per not per county, it was one page per village. Very interesting stuff.
There we go.
There we go. There we go. So in democracy, there we go.
See, love this picture because it's all the missions.
Yes, and these are just amazing documents. And I apologize, I don't read Swedish. But if we drop into one of these, say one that someone is asking questions about, for example, you can see that these documents they're also not narrative, they're also structured. You have material Stockholm, the place name and the land name are data fields that are applied to everything on the page. Then you've got these names, titles, occupations, and addresses of each one of the women signatories of the petition. And so they've configured this as a spreadsheet, and they've defined the columns they want of forename, after name, I guess is first name, last name, title, occupation, address, and having people transcribe in this format that matches the document means that they will be able to export at the end of this a spreadsheet that has a row per petitioner with links to the original image, with what page it's on, and then these user-defined fields will be promulgated down to the relevant records on those rows.
Yeah, so we could talk a little bit about export or import, or we could see if there's any questions.
Maybe we should go back and take a look at the chat because I've not been able to see that while we work. Yeah, so are there any questions as we go?
Here we go.
Yeah.
Field-based transcriptions be used with more open-ended transcription for the same project. I'm thinking of court documents where it would be useful to have the place and date as separate field and then an open field for the rest of the document. So yes, how you accomplish that is you set up some text fields within a field-based project. So you could do
like big text areas.
Big text area, text blocks.
The alternative, if you work with court documents, particularly if you have more than one place and date, if you're trying to kind of annotate the whole text, would be to use what we call subject indexing.
Or you could do a metadata form at the end of each document.
Right. Yes. So there's a lot of different ways to do this.
This is the sort of discussion we love to have with you. So if you want a call and we look at documents together and we talk about different approaches you could take, because there's like everything, there's multiple ways about doing it.
Let's take a look at one of the examples.
We work on tables and text that doesn't belong to the main text, but text blocks on the sides of the page as well.
So if we're doing, the examples that we've shown of doing textual transcription so far are examples that are they're very simple, right? They're asking people to encode material without using any complicated markup. More sophisticated projects, or I'm not going to say sophisticated, projects that have a digital focus, like digital scholarly, they do substantially more in the way of markup. And so for that, we support about 30 different kinds of tags. So as people are transcribing, we have buttons for about 20 of them, and sites want. So we can say, oh, we'll say, oh, nose, actually this is a deletion or something like that. Which will the one of those tags that we support is marginalia, specifically for encoding blocks of text as marginal to the rest of the document. One of the things I did want to show when I was diving into this, though, was the ability to tag subjects and dates in ways that you can pull these out. So typhoid fever is a subject that is of interest in this document. So we have used wiki links to mark that up as a subject. So typhoid fever is worth looking at. And if we go take a look at this, I'm going to have to abandon my change, I think. Take a look at this page and look at the overview. These, okay. We can see that typhoid fever is marked up as a subject, and I can come in and read all the pages that mention typhoid fever. That's not actually very interesting in this case because there's only one of them. But if we take a look at Dr. Thompson, you can see that Dr. Thompson is, we know from context, Ace Thompson, and he is listed using all of these different chunks of verbatim documents. We can go in and read all of them as well if we wanted to.
There's another question. If our project had docs in another language, would users be able to include a translation of the text if they had those language skills along with transcription? The answer is yes. You can actually turn on translation as a task. And what that actually does is it adds just tabs. You can do and then the translation, and yeah, you're on my account instead of yours. So you don't have your
my examples. So yeah, so if we right, so this can be set up to have a second step for a given document, so that people can work from either the image or from the transcription itself. And if we take a look at one of the ones that we have figured for this, So this is a book that we brought all the text for OCR correction and then are doing translation. Let's drop into this particular document. So this is a Middle English text that was published by the Early English Text Society that used a really, really weird way of doing typesetting. So the OCR itself is really bad. What we're doing is correcting the OCR. So you can see there's this correction phase where we are kind of getting rid of you see the quoth he, right? We've changed that to quoth he with TA instead of the porn. But and done that, can come in and translate it into modern English. So, and we've got translated from wretch he to wretch he said. The to tell me instead of that presume. And we're doing this back and forth the image and the transcription. Does that answer your question? Okay, do you want to show off the metadata creation at the end? Does that make sense? Or
Let's see, we'll pull that up, but if there's any more questions, please just put them in. Do you want to pull up maybe what do we have for metadata?
we could pull up the Wrangel Island.
Or we could pull up just metadata for images.
Oh yeah, we could. Oh, do we handle special characters? Speaking of translation, so we support every script supported by Unicode. And this also includes the 4-byte scripts, which are used for Ojibwe and a handful of others. If you set the language of a project specifically, we also can infer the text direction of left to right versus right to left. We can appropriately. There was a great project that the British Library did using medieval Arabic scientific manuscripts. That was just, it was fantastic because it had beautiful illustrations of plants and things. The only real limitation I know of is that we don't do a great job supporting top-bottom scripts. Old we might need to do some work on.
So you can also set up project to do script and then metadata forms, and
the metadata is item level metadata as opposed to kind of image level metadata.
So this is a letter project, and we've set it up. So we asked for the sender first name, last name, the document date, where it was sent from, who it went to, and then a controlled vocabulary of tags that you can apply to the letter. It's kind of instead of just saying one page, you can kind of look through all the pages. This is coming from the portal to Texas. And then you can also look at the transcribed text, which is incomplete in this case, and any metadata that came in with it. So if you want to do kind of metadata remediation, do that as well. So are there more questions? Let's find out. So I think we've shown you a ton. We're happy to keep talking, but we don't want to overwhelm you. And we are happy to have calls to kind of go over your individual material and kind of brainstorm different approaches for your goals.
Yeah. So thank you all for attending. And I hope you have a good rest of your day.